Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host tonight, ObjectivelyDan. Today is September 3rd, 2021, and joining me today is a special guest, I guess, who hasn't been on this show in like 2 years, but is now back today in reincarnated in a different form. It is Suris the Skeptic. Suris, welcome to the show.
Hey there, how's it going, Dan? Thank you for having me on.
It's going great. For those of you who are listening at home and don't have the video, I am talking to an anime cat girl on screen right now. Virtual reality technology has brought us to many heights. Not many of us may have expected this, but some of us absolutely have. And so here we are. Welcome to the show, Suris.
Jury's out on whether or not you expected this.
I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. I don't think the crew knew it was going to happen because I've seen your stuff, and if I just was like, yeah, we're probably going to make this a thing. So here we are. If you told, we were talking before the show, but if you told me a couple of years ago that I would be hosting a call-in show with an anime cat girl talking about like atheism and abortion, I would think that you're nuts. But here I am. This is what I'm doing with my life, and it's awesome. So it's very, very cool. But that's why I want to start the show off tonight with Suris. This is a show where we talk to people about what people believe and why. And this is a call-in show, so we want to hear you guys call in and talk to us with that number below on the screen if you're watching. But we talked last week on the show about abortion a bit, Suris, and unfortunately, it seems the worst has come to pass. Texas has made a law come into effect on September 1st, saying that abortions are basically illegal after 6 weeks term of pregnancy. And
there's a technicality on
there's
that.
There's technicality on that, but that's kind of the short of it, right?
So yes, it's after 6 weeks, but realistically, it's after 4 weeks, and it's because if you are to go in and get an abortion now, right, ignoring all the other the bounty hunter stuff that is wrapped up in that now, there's a 2-week period where they force you to you have to listen to the sonogram, and you have to look at all of these pictures of the fetus, and you have to go through, basically they make you go through emotional turmoil to try to guilt you into keeping it. And there's a 2-week process for that. So the majority of pregnancies are discovered between week 4 and week 7, which means not only is the 6-week ban already taking into account that a good majority of people are in that 7th week and they discovered it and they're already outside of the legal area. The majority of people in general, vast majority, are not going to be able to even legally get these. Because if you discover that you're pregnant in week 5, so you just missed your period and you went, oh, I'm going to go get a pregnancy test because that felt kind of weird. Right. Then yeah, you're screwed. Now there's a whole bunch of other issues wrapped up in that. And I did a video on this recently, so I could go on and on.
By recently, you mean literally today is when you put it on your channel. But yeah, it's awful. And the reason why I want to talk about this again, I mean, just like last week, is this is one of those issues where it's not like, with environmental issues, right? There's always competing interests in these fields, but it's somehow tied to money and a lot of this stuff. This is an issue to me, sirs, where it seems like this is pure ideology fighting in this country, right?
It is. And actually the argument that's being used, the cutoff date that's being utilized, is an area of pure emotion. I went into this in my my video, but the idea that we put any special significance on the heart, the reason that it's a 6 week cutoff is that is when cardiac activity is generally in a very small sense being recorded. Now, it's why a lot of these bills are called heartbeat bills. The only reason we put any significance on the heart is because it is fully arbitrary. For all intents and purposes, all of your emotions come from your brain. Your personality comes from your brain. Your feelings, they come from your brain. By basing this based on when your heart is developed enough to beat with a pulse, it is purely emotional, because when you boil it down, it is arbitrary. It's like if I said, hey, when the lungs are formed for the first time, that's going to be our cutoff point. Or, hey, when your left pinky finger has been formed for the first time, that's our cutoff point. And,
Right.
Or I could name any vital organ for this and just use that. Hey, your liver has been formed. This is the moment where we deem you to be a human. And now all people who have their liver removed are no longer human. It's literally just that the heart has had cultural significance for humans for such a long time before we understood that your brainwaves are literally what make you be and feel. And yet that's where we're denoting the cutoff.
Right. And like, there's obviously a lot of misinformation that surrounds this issue. A lot of people bring up the fact that, like, a lot of like products, like, Coke products are actually made with like aborted fetal tissue and stuff like that. A lot of that kind of
and
stuff.
drinking babies.
Yeah, drinking babies, right? A nice, refreshing glass of babies. Now, I guess that would fall into the atheist mythos there of consuming children, but obviously all that stuff's not true, right? And on top of that, there is just this idea of once the at conception, the soul is kind of formed, and there's this like kind of kooky idea of what even a soul is, or even when they conflate zygotes with babies. There's all kinds of misinformation out there, and a big part of it is because of, again, what you point out, these emotional arguments, and a lot of it is coming from ideology specifically. I mean, a lot of these conservative Christian movements that have been gunning for laws like this to happen all the time, like pretty much ever since we've been alive, right? And it's really, really frustrating that we're seeing this happen now, of all times. And I'm just really, really worried. I'm worried about the 14-year-old girl that has to carry their pregnancy to term because they don't have the options. It's like Texas.
Technically, there's an issue with that one too, because in Texas now, the way the bill is worded, if it comes to a point of am I allowed to say the R word, or should I everybody understands what non-consensual assault means?
Sure. Yeah.
So in a case of non-consensual assault, or in a case of incest, in Texas, if you actually do say that, hey, I want to get an abortion because of these reasons, they literally have this entire process now where you have to sit down and explain beat for beat what happened. And then one of the questions that is in your, we'll delightfully call it an interview, is, why didn't you stop it? And I'm just going to go ahead and say right now, the question, why didn't you stop it, it probably doesn't need to be asked in a situation where I didn't consent to it, is part of the conversation. If I didn't consent to it, you can fill in your blank on the answer of why didn't I stop it. It's probably going to be some form of I was powerless to and therefore, or I was threatened to and therefore. This is it feels like a setup that's there that intuitively, when you hear it the first time, you're like, okay, yeah, prove that this happened and I understand that. But the way that it's functionally going to operate feels a lot like shaming the victims into reliving all of this. And by having the stipulations that, okay, in a case of incest, in a case of forced assault, they can be more they can have more leeway on the law where that's concerned. With that being the way that things are being structured, this leads me to another problem, which is now you have there's been a narrative that conservatives have pushed a lot, especially in evangelical circles, especially in places like the Catholic Church, that forced assault is not as much of a problem as several what was the way that it's usually worded, like the way that young women on college campuses try to tell you it is. That's not how it is. It doesn't happen all that often. That's what we hear. My fear is that incentivizing not necessarily incentivizing, but almost incentivizing you to argue that you were assaulted so that you can get, in many cases, what would be a medically necessary procedure for yourself. It incentivizes you in some cases to lie and throw somebody under the bus for the sake of self-preservation. And then that would end up creating a feedback loop into the narrative of, oh, well, look at all these women who've lied about it.
Right.
You've backed them into a corner where they felt that they've had to. And yeah, it's horrible to lie about that and ruin somebody's life. That is one of the worst things you can do to a person, is throw them under the bus and ruin their entire existence. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when it's engineered this way.
Right.
And I don't know if that, I can't get in the minds of any particular lawmakers' heads. I don't have that ability. My fear, though, is that may have been considered at some point.
So, man, okay, I never even thought about it from that angle, but yeah, so like this law is also serving like multiple purposes, in the sense that it's also fueling like these weird narratives about women, and like this stereotype that women lie about their experiences. Like, that's so terrible. There's more things to consider about how terrible this whole thing is. The point I wanted to make about too was, for people who don't live in the United States, who understand how big of a deal this is to even just try to get this happen. Like, because some people might say, well, can't you just go somewhere else outside of the state? If you're driving from Austin and you're trying to get to Louisiana, right? So Austin, is kind of central Texas. It takes like 7 hours just to get out of the state. Like, Texas is huge. Okay?
Texas is larger than most countries.
Right.
And topple onto that, there's a couple of issues that get layered onto that. One, now the only people who potentially would be able to get an abortion if they needed one would be people who have the money to actually go on a trip like that. Not everybody has the wherewithal to. It wasn't until very recently, as in like a couple of months ago, that I had a vehicle that could travel more than 10 minutes in any one direction without causing me severe issues. Now it's not just the money issue. There's layers and layers and layers that get wrapped into this. If memory serves, when it comes to places like when it comes to the outskirts of Texas, there's not really that many abortion clinics.
Well, I was going to say, too, because like Louisiana should not be your safe haven to go to for an abortion either, right?
No, Rescue Evil 7 happened there.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But also just like, it's not like that they're going to feel too politically, different on these issues, right? So I have a feeling Louisiana is probably going to be next in line. I know that I've read at least reports about Florida and other places like considering these kinds of laws for their own states.
Well, I know Florida and Georgia have been they've been pushing for this for a while. Yeah. Georgia actually had a heartbeat bill for just a little while, and then the ACLU popped in and was like, hey, maybe not, maybe don't.
Yeah. So anyway, like I posted about this on Twitter this week because I get asked sometimes about like why talk about issues like this, right? Like why bother other people about issues like religion? Because it seems some people say, well, it should be this personal thing. You shouldn't actually talk to people about it. But like religion is absolutely informing this issue right now.
Correct.
And like we have to fight back. It's not an instance of we are shoving this down people's throats. They are literally making their ideology into law in this country. And we have to follow that, whether we like it or not, whether we believe in the same kinds of things that they do or not. So it's really, I don't know if this is going to have people, be open to this more and realize where all this is coming from now that like it's getting really serious. But unfortunately, like I said, this has been going on. Like attempts of this have been happening for decades, and now it's finally happening.
And there are some people who I will not name because this is not the time nor the place that think that this is a right that's been stripped away from people because they've committed some horrible thing, like they've given up some fundamental right elsewhere, so now they have to give up this right. No, this is a battle that's been being fought for ages. The whole reason we even had the conversation with Roe v. Wade, which at the end of the day is mostly a privacy issue, which kind of feeds into some of the problems with this current iteration of the bill, the whole reason that we've even had that conversation is that this has been an ongoing battle and it has not stopped. And I think this particular thing exemplifies the fact that in America, or really anywhere, once you've earned your civil rights, they are still not guarantees. They will never and cannot be guarantees.
It's so true.
So long as there are people who are ideologically opposed to you having those ideals. But speaking of ideology, I just want to throw out a hypothetical. I used this is an argument that I made in an older video of mine, and I'll repeat it here for fun. You mentioned earlier the idea that a soul, enters the body upon conception, and therefore all of these lives are important in the face of God. That's a very ideological, religiously motivated way to look at this. Well, there's another ideological, religiously motivated argument that is made a lot in terms of Christian apologia to try to argue that the Christian God is not some kind of moral monster, and it's something called the age of accountability. The age of accountability can also be known as, the age of sufficient knowledge. This is the moment where a child can be held accountable enough to have chosen whether or not to, be a child of God, basically, where they can choose to accept Jesus into their heart when they have a sufficient amount of time, sufficient amount of knowledge, where Romans 1 can argue that, you had it written on your heart. You could have done something about this. If you are a Christian who is against abortion, I have a proposition for you. It is not just a pro-choice argument. It is a abortion mandate almost. If your goal is to get more souls into heaven, and you agree with the age of accountability, then all fetuses that are aborted go to heaven. Every single one. It is functionally identical to saving that soul.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because I this was a thing too about, I remember hearing this growing up, asking like what happens to kids who die too young to really understand and things like that. And of course, depending on your denomination, there's different ideas about how salvation works. Some of it is just pure baptism, some of it's through other means. Although there are verses that say you can baptize your whole family and they don't even necessarily have to be baptize and they
don't have to consent. It just happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I know that's a big thing in Mormonism too. Like they baptize the dead.
They baptize the dead, and I believe there's a verse that Paul says somewhere in one of his letters that enforces that. But anyway, there's all kinds of weird ideas about how people are even saved, and nobody even has an agreed upon thing. But I guess that if you're a person who believes in that theology, I guess that makes sense, huh?
And it's because when I was a kid, I was taught the age of accountability. That was because it was taught to me that no, if a kid doesn't understand or somebody doesn't know, like they don't have sufficient knowledge. So of course, God's not going to be a monster. He's not evil. He's not going to send you to go burn in a fiery lake because you just simply didn't know. You never had an opportunity to know, so you don't have sufficient knowledge. Okay, cool. Then we've hit this awkward point where the reductio ad absurdum of your position is just yeetus the fetus 100% of the time.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Oh wow, we've got a lot of we've got jiggle physics on this show, and we've got yeetus the fetus. This is freaking me out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, this is a weird one. But no, you're absolutely right. That seems to be logically sound if you're following from those premises.
And it's weird. It's like you have to either reject the age of accountability, which makes God a moral monster, or you have to accept this other very, very heinous proposition. Like, take your pick. They're both bad.
It's almost as if Christianity doesn't make any sense, huh?
There are many aspects of it that I believe do not. This is one of them.
I would think I would be inclined to agree with you on that, sir. But with that, I think we need to move on to some announcements so we can get to some calls here. I want to first off give a shout out to the patron of the week. Every single week, we give a shout out to one of our patrons, and that's for folks who donate on patreon.com/truthwanted. I want to thank everybody that donates on that Patreon, but we give a special shout out once a week, and this week's patron of the week is John Doe. Thank you so much, John Doe, for donating. And again, everybody who donates on Truth Wanted Patreon, you guys rock. Truth Wanted is a part of the Atheist community of Austin. It is a production of that. It's a 501c organization dedicated to the promotion of positive atheist culture and the separation of religion and government. There's a number of ways you can support the ACA, and we'll get to some of those in a bit here once we take our first caller. But thanks everybody who donates on that Patreon. You guys rock. And thank you, John Doe, for donating as well. Suris, you want to get to some calls?
I think so. I think calls would be great.
Okay, cool. Can your physical form right now handle calls? Is that possible?
If it couldn't, I could always switch to the slime form.
Maybe we shouldn't switch to the slime form or not. I don't know. Maybe if chat demands it, but I saw that slime form and no demand is coming from me at this time. So let's get to some calls here. We got a couple of interesting ones. I want to talk to Jamie first, calling in from the UK. Jamie, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hello, good evening. How are you?
Doing good, Jamie. How are you doing?
I'm a little drunk because I'm in England. It's nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, and we all get drunk over this way.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the best time to call into a call-in show, for sure. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I wanted to call about something I always knew as a child. Is lines in the sky. And I'm not talking about chemtrails or contrails or vapor trails. I've always noticed as a child these dark lines against the blue sky, which were always there. I never took any notice of them until a point in school. I was about 10 years old when the teacher in the class asked, how do birds navigate their way south for winter? And I just suggested it was they follow the lines in the sky. And all these confused looks just stared at me, and I had to sink into my seat and realize nobody else seemed to know what I was talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Lines in the sky? Like you're not talking about lines of clouds or lines of contrails. What do you mean by lines in the sky?
There's some dark. So there's a phenomenon that happens where there are some dark lines that can be seen in the sky, and they basically look like they stretch. From your perspective, they stretch on almost forever. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to be honest. What's really happening there? That is, from what I understand, that is a product of the sun basically casting its light onto a series of clouds, and then you effectively seeing refracted shadows in the sky. Like that's functionally what it is. I actually have a picture of what it looks like pulled up right here on my other monitor.
Oh shit. Okay. I don't know if you can get that on the screen. I guess that'd be cool. But yeah, I'm not sure if I've heard of this phenomenon unless okay, I'm looking it up now. Yeah, okay, so that's like as the sun is setting in the sky, you can see like black darkish lines in between brighter ones. Okay, yeah, okay, I see that. Yeah, that seems like that'd be a natural phenomenon to me. I don't know what's nothing supernatural there if that's what you were getting at.
Oh no, I'm not saying it's anything supernatural. Only later, this last few years, I found out that some scientists are saying certain birds are navigating not just by lakes and landmarks, but actually following magnetic fields. And I was wondering if what I was actually seeing is the magnetic fields.
No. Oh. So what you're seeing are and yes, Tesla Ranger, I believe what they're talking about is crepuscular rays. They are not. Those are not magnetic fields. There are magnetic fields, and yes, birds can see Earth's magnetic fields, and we do know how that's possible. You're right that a lot of the evidence for this has come up in very recent years, but they have a sense called magnet. I have this pulled up, and I'm trying to pronounce it, but it looks very weird to me. Magnetoperception. Or magnetoreception. There we go. Magnetoreception. I had to get my X-Men brain turned on for a second there. But, they have an ability to orient themselves to magnetic fields, and it's an evolutionary thing that they have. But what you're seeing in the sky are not magnetic fields. What you're seeing in the sky is a product of what the sun is doing with our clouds and with our atmosphere. It is a unique phenomenon, yes, but it is a different phenomenon to the electromagnetic fields that birds are utilizing.
Okay. But when I can see them when other people can't?
So there are some things that we know how light functions. When it comes to colors, when it comes to light, these are not things that you are actually seeing as they truly are. If I look at a color green and Dan looks at a color green, the greens we see are different because we're not actually seeing the color green. The color green does not exist. We are seeing our brain's interpretation of those light wavelengths. We're seeing that reflection, and that's what gives our brain the idea that, oh, that's what green looks like. If just like how when you, for instance, see starbursts with light, but other people don't see starbursts with light because they don't have, I believe it's a astigmatism in the eye. In being able to see certain things or not seeing things that other people see, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a unique ability to see magnetic fields. That's just basically how our brains interpret light. For instance, when outside of the photographs, I have not seen those dark lines myself, or at least at the very least, I have not looked up and tried my dangdest to perceive them. Now that I know they're a thing, I will probably be doing everything in my power when there is a sunset to take a look up there and do so. But the fact that other people can't see it, at the end of the day, it gives you a unique anecdote about yourself, but it doesn't, I would say it doesn't have any more meaning past that.
Mm-hmm. And I actually saw these the other day driving home. So I now know what you're talking about now that I'm seeing these pictures here. So yeah, light can be definitely finicky too when it comes to your point of view and how that works too. So like I've got some lights on my face right now with the wall behind me. If we even move the camera just slightly, it's going to affect the way that the light is bouncing off my face and into the camera. So yeah, I think we just solved this one. I think the case has been cracked. I don't know. Is there anything else we can add about this, Jamie? Because I think we just got science.
Firstly, time of day is irrelevant. I can see it any time of day, morning, noon, night. The lines are like a crisscross, like a map across the sky. They move slightly. They do change slightly, but they're not fixed. But I could recognize a place on Earth simply by looking at the sky if I've been there before.
So
well,
being able to see
go
them
ahead.
Being able to see them at any time of day, that one I wouldn't know about. And at the same time, I have to take your word on it. I can't go in and pop your eyeballs out of your head, put them into my head and go, okay, I can see what you're seeing now. That I don't know, because when it comes to seeing black lines in the sky, when it comes to seeing black streaks, for the most part, we do know what those are. Being able to tell where you are based on black lines in the sky, that sounds like another thing that we've done before, which is figuring out locations based on stars and other things that we happen to see in the sky. It sounds similar to that, but not quite the exact same thing. So I don't know how best I could explain that. I might need a little bit more time to sit down and research and have a little more time to understand exactly what is being experienced there, because I can't step in your shoes and experience it.
Yeah, and I'm glad Suris is on the show tonight, because if you started that conversation with me, I'm not even sure where we would have gone with that. But to be honest with you, but yeah, I the only thing I could say is maybe I don't know when the last time you went to the eye doctor was, but maybe that would help too. You know, I mean, like Suris said, we can't see through your eyes, so I don't know what you're seeing. But
no, that's true. I think I could actually demonstrate in a scientific way what I'm seeing, but it'd be very expensive and complicated. So I think it's way past that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Jamie, I appreciate you calling in. I hope we were able to give you some answers to your questions. Keep on watching the skies, but don't look into the sun. I hear that's bad for you.
That one can be detrimental.
That one can be detrimental. Eclipses too, despite what previous presidents might have done, you should not be doing that. But hey, that's just our advice here. So before we get to this next caller here, I definitely want to talk about a little bit more ways you can support our show. So one of the ways you can support the show is become a member. You can do that for as little as 99 cents a month. You can just click that join button below the video, and it's going to give you access to special chat emojis, and you're going to be immune from the messaging limits that non-members have in the chat there. So like ignoring the slow mode and stuff. So, you can also, again, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/truthwanted. And always watch this show live on Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time. So thank you again, everybody who supports this show. And with that out of the way, I want to take another call here. This is probably also going to be an interesting one. We'll see. I want to talk to Chris, who's calling in from Canada. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going, Dan and Suris, right?
Yes.
Suris?
Suris.
It's going pretty
Suris
good. I grabbed a beer because Jamie had a drink, so I grabbed
Hey, fine. I guess we're all drinking tonight except us. So thanks for inviting us to the party, guys.
Joke's on you. I
it.
have Diet Dr. Pepper. I'm drinking a lot.
Is it anime Diet Dr. Pepper, or is it just like regular?
It's just regular.
Okay. I don't know how that would work. I don't know if you probably had some. Oh my God, he's doing like an anime sad face for the listeners. This is a very visual medium that's happening right now. Very visual experience. Anyway, Chris, what do you want to talk to us about?
So I'm a bit of a different caller. We're going to have a bit of a different conversation, I think. I want to say straight up. So I've been in the Atheist Discord, and one thing about me is I have bipolar disorder. And so one of the reason I'm calling in is to just educate the world a bit on mental health, respect, family, and that kind of message. So I am mentally ill in this conversation, and I kind of want to use that as an avenue to talk about mental illness on your show a little bit.
Okay.
So
I saw before you go on, I did see in the chat here that you said you want to talk about the first scientifically constructed theory of how God's consciousness works. So are we going to talk about that?
Yes, so that's exactly part of the theory. So in my theory, I am the scientific evidence for God because I have the first working theory of how my own consciousness works. And it involves a dream I had with God where God diagnosed me bipolar. And so a symptom of bipolar disorder, there's one symptom you need to keep an eye on, and that's bouncing around between ideas. But the other symptom are God delusions. And a lot of bipolar people describe their disorder as having superpowers and as having these kind of really powerful emotions. So I wrote a statement about my bipolar disorder that I just like to read on the show. And it's just kind of the evidence I've come to that my consciousness is God's own consciousness in a human being.
Okay. Let's see, because this is definitely territory that we need to tread super carefully on. Can we just start with the fact that, just because we have dreams about something, does that count as evidence for a God or really anything? Because I don't see how that follows.
That's the crux of my argument. And the crux of my argument is that because I have this unique bipolar brain that's susceptible to hallucinations and delusions, and I have this dream with God in which God diagnosed me with this bipolar disorder, I'm in a very unique situation to kind of be the human being to define what is reality and to define the rules of reality and the rules of a dream.
So let me, if I can interject on that, and I don't mean anything that I'm going to say here to disparage mental illness or to disparage any particular experience that you've had. But when I hear the statements, I have a delusional brain, and then I hear the follow-up, therefore I can define reality, these are fundamentally incongruent statements. These are not statements that when put up next to each other flow from one to the other. There's a form of mental gymnastics that has to be taken to go from point A to point B. Now, I don't want to dig into it more than that, but I just want to throw that out there, that if you admit to frequent hallucinations and delusions, then arguing that therefore you are in a unique position to better define reality, that does not follow to me.
So that is the crux of my argument, is because I have the ability to kind of it's called insight. When someone has a delusion and they when someone has a delusion and they're able to recognize it's a delusion, it's insight. And so I basically have insight into my entire life. So my delusions are experienced as kind of coincidences, as, that's a coincidence in my life. That's a coincidence in the way the world is constructed. That's a coincidence. And when I look at all these coincidences, every sign in the universe points to the fact that I am God's own consciousness and a human being come back to life.
I don't know if that follows. That feels like... In fact, no, I know for a fact that doesn't follow.
Right.
So let me explain to you. So one of the things I did was I did a science experiment on my brain where I treated God was real during the day and God was fake during my dreams. And he appeared to me in a dream.
Okay,
so I kind of connected a narrative to the universe with my life through science and the scientific.
So that's not the scientific method, though. So with the scientific method, there's a couple of things that you've left out. One of them is peer review. You've said that this is a theory, but for it to be a theory, there needs to be a body of facts that have gone through that rigorous peer review process. And a theory is when you assemble those facts together, and then you have something that is a working body of data that has gone through peer review, that has gone through that level of study. If all of this has been internal introspection, then what you have is anecdote, and the plural of anecdote is not data.
So the difference between my theory and what you're thinking of when you describe a theory constructed with the scientific method is that my theory is defined to be true because it is self-consistent, because I have this dream with God, which is an event in the universe at which point I can define truth. So I can accept, so I can kind of prove that kind of narrative. Oh, sorry. Yeah. If you have a problem with that, you can speak.
I don't think that's how truth really works.
That's really not how truth works.
Yeah.
Because I can define God as an emotional being, and so I can define a truth as an emotion and a thought at the same time.
So you are aware that
truth and a physical truth.
You're aware that definitions are by their nature descriptive, right? They're not prescriptive. You cannot define something as true, therefore it becomes true. Something has a property that is separate completely from what it is defined as. If I have a dry brick and I define it as wet, our concept of wet does not allow that definition to hold any water. So what we have here is, let's start with the definition of truth. A fairly consistent definition of truth, and granted, there's 1,000 ways you can go about this, but one of them is that which comports with reality. If we also define knowledge as a subset of beliefs, so if I believe something and then it happens to be consistent with reality, it happens to be true, that belief is knowledge. I know that thing. What you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are claiming that you know that your mind is the mind of God. You are a reincarnation in some form or variety of that God based on a variant of reality you've proposed to us, but it seems almost as if you've defined this, you've argued this as if you've defined that reality, and in defining that reality, you've made it a form of truth. Is that? Am I following there?
You're really following it really well. Yes, and you're kind of making leaps that you're not. So the thing is, I have the ability to define it as truth in this theory. It sounds backwards the way you're kind of doing it, but you're right. I have constructed my reality in the way in which my reality is consistent. And because my reality is consistent and logical and constructed around this belief in God, I'm able to construct a theory of everything. And it was interesting that you mentioned reality, because that's one of the focuses of kind of my theory, is I've also coincidentally created rules to reality to test
Chris,
my
before you get into that,
reality.
Did you say that your ability to define truth came to you because you had a dream involving God?
Yes, and so God is the absolute moral truth in the universe, and he also is the being that determines absolute physical truth.
But Chris, there's a lot of people that have dreams about God all over the world, and I don't think that they have the ability to define truth like that, right? Like, do you agree that there are people? But do you agree it's possible that people can have dreams of God and not have that ability?
Absolutely, my dream is different. God defined a new sin in my dream.
Okay, but if God defines a new sin, okay, so let's say there's a priest over here in Florida, and they have a dream where God defines a new sin to them, and so they decree to everyone around them that X thing is now a sin. Ignore any biblical conversation where this is concerned. We just have a God who's defined a new sin there. That's not a unique thing. Like there's nothing unique about that. And again, what you're describing is an anecdotal personal experience and attempting to argue essentially to us that because of this anecdotal personal experience, we should accept that you are God, at least in some form or tangent.
Yeah.
You said something interesting earlier to the conversation that I want to pull back to, and it was the mention of words. And so one of the things about my message is I'm authorized by God. I was named a new apostle. So I'm named a new apostle, so I'm authorized to leave writings. And so because I'm authorized to leave writings, I'm the being that dictates what our verbal language goes and down into written language. And so part of God's message is to unify and become a common language of the universe.
Okay,
and
but
so,
like
for example,
the problem,
I have a question.
The problem, Chris, is that we don't believe that to be true. Like we don't believe that you have that authority. So I think it would be good if you try to convince us how you have that authority. And I'm not sure
I have a way we can handle this.
Okay.
For fun. So I have a question,
Absolutely.
Chris. In your estimation, is God a being with perfect knowledge? Is he? Are they an omniscient being?
God has omniscience, yes.
Okay, and you effectively share a mind with God, correct?
I share an emotional mind with God. I have a different logical mind.
You have a different logical mind. Okay, so I want you then, if you share this emotional mind with God, it logically follows that you should be able to construct then an emotionally based argument that can and will convince both Dan and I. If God is omniscient and you share a mind with God and you share the emotional side of that mind, there's a second half to this, then you should be able to form an emotional argument that convinces us. Now, this creates a bit of a problem because what's going to happen is you're going to convince an argument, and then when it doesn't convince us, then you're going to move that goalpost again. That's my thought process. That's what I think.
Okay, well, your emotions are proof of God. That's how God's omniscience works. God speaks through a human being emotions, not their thoughts. He lets a human being develop their own language and think their own thoughts, and that's how his omniscience works. And that's how omniscience, omnipotence, and free will are logically consistent with one another in this universe.
Okay, so
I think I don't know if there's much more we can honestly get out of this conversation. I think I kind of want to move on.
Well, what's wrong with that? Wait. Let me just ask you, what's wrong with God speaking through strictly emotion and letting you think your own language and think your own thoughts?
I have no reason to believe that. I have no reason to believe that, Chris. Like
I should have right now an emotional need for God. That's what I should have. If we have, because when we have this logical thing, we know that we should have something or should pursue something. When it's emotional, usually that's when we get something like a craving. I should have right now, based on your variant of deity, I should have some sort of craving for it, some sort of craving for him. And I don't. And there's a statement that you said just a second ago that I want to go ahead and point out. Free will and omniscience, the idea of perfect knowledge, these are not congruent principles. If God knows that you will be doing a jumping jack tomorrow at 10:42 a.m. on Tuesday, then at 10:40 a.m. on Tuesday, you will be doing that jumping jack. There is no option you have there. Now, you may have the blissful illusion that you have an option, that you made a deliberate choice, but per omniscience, for perfect knowledge to exist, you were going to be doing that no matter what. Your destiny was laid out fatalistically, and every choice you think you've made is in and of itself a delusion in the face of true omniscience. The idea that free will and omniscience exist congruently with one another is to define those words so loosely that they mean nothing.
So one problem with you is you thinking of yourself as one whole object. You are a consciousness in this universe that is produced by multiple things. For example, you're a multicellular object. So when you're doing a jumping jack, it's not as though you are a singular object deciding to do the jumping jack and God is making the decision for you. You are a thing in this universe creating an experience of a jumping jack out of
None of that changes my argument. None of that changes my argument. No, it doesn't. The individual aspects of this, the individual factors are still person A doing jumping jack, person B has perfect knowledge, jumping jack was fatalistically determined. The amount of cells required to make this happen, the amount of moving parts, it doesn't change the fatalistic properties of this scenario.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and let this call go too, because again, this was already just there's a lot of things we got to be careful with a conversation like this, and I think we've made our points, right? Like, I don't think anything you receive in a dream should be meaningful in anything outside of just being a dream, right?
I think dreams are useful insofar as they can offer some insight into maybe what's going on in your subconscious. Past that, and even then, you shouldn't make decisions based off of that. You just go, oh, that's a thing going on in my head. That's neat.
For sure. Yeah. Can it give you insight on things? Sure. I think people, get insights from their dreams all the time, but is that source necessarily divine? I don't think so. I think that's probably just our brains coming up with stuff. But there are people who have talked to me before on the show that believe in, consciousness being a signal that comes from somewhere else. So there's definitely a diversity of opinion on that, shall we say. But before we keep going on with the show, I do have the promo clip that I want to show. So let's watch this promo real quick.
My co-host tonight is the only person I know who watches more hockey than porn. Welcome, Puck.
Well, it's the off season right now, so the ratio is a little bit different.
At that point, I realized I had my first best argument against intelligent design in the human body, because once you start talking about men's testicles, people pay attention.
Step in the right direction. We'll step in the right direction. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, well, if I can even get the layman terms for crab and a lobster, let alone anything
Layman
else.
term for crab is a pinchy boy.
Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Honor thy father and mother. Boom, boom, boom. Got it all done. And the world is far too complicated for anything like that to ever be possible.
Oh, I know I'm a woman? How do I know I'm a woman? What properties do I have mentally that make me a woman?
A vagina.
Oh, I have a mental vagina? I have a mental vagina, Javier. Can you see my vagina? Do you know if I have a vagina? Stop talking.
Great clip with Shannon at the end there talking about mental vaginas. Yes, mental vaginas. Fun stuff. Definitely go check out some of our other programs if you haven't already. They are pretty cool, and I'm on some of them sometimes. So if you like me, you should look at those other ones too. So with that promo out of the way, let's go ahead and take our next caller here. We got two really good ones here. I want to talk to both of you guys, but let's start with William calling in from California. William, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good.
How's it going, William?
Just enjoying the night. What's
Very
up?
Good. I'm an atheist, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Or at least I have no belief in God. But I'll find myself in a conversation with someone, and, if it tends towards their belief in God, and when I start to retort, I find myself being a bit arrogant. And I'm just wondering, how do I moderate that so, I don't come off like an asshole?
That's such a great question.
It's going to feel weird to answer this, because I feel like in trying to answer this with any amount of authority, either one of us can come off as arrogant too.
Yeah, that's true. Here's what I think of this, right? So I consider my non-belief a result of my privilege. Okay, so the way that I construct that is I grew up in a certain culture. I grew up in a certain environment that caused me to have the beliefs that I did when I was younger, right? That being Christianity, and like everything that came with it, right? And so when I became, when I got access to college and I the internet helped out with a bunch of stuff, that started a real impetus in my change. Now, a lot of people, they didn't have to do that, right? That wasn't their method, but that's a method for a lot of people. They kind of get more exposure to the world and they kind of question their own ideas, and then they realize, oh, that's not the same. So like that's just not going to be everybody's process. But like I have to internalize that narrative when I am relating to other people, because I have to remember that I was once in a place where I thought I knew everything too, and I thought that I just had the truth and that it was my job to share it. And I just have to humble myself and put myself in that place. It's easy for me to do in particular because I can go watch a video of myself, of me as a Christian, talking to Anthony Magnabosco whenever I want. That's up there. Most people don't have that. But like I look at that guy and I look at that 19-year-old and I think, yeah, that was me, and of course I said stuff I would never agree to today, but hey, like people do change and people can really open themselves up to new ideas if you really give them that chance. Now, Anthony, he didn't change my mind in that single experience. In fact, I would say it wasn't one single person that did. It was a cultivation of a life of experiences and a life of conversations. So you have to remember that too, that you are not going to be the single impetus, most likely, that's going to change somebody's mind on anything. So, don't let that sway your conversations, right? Don't let that be the thing saying, well, I have to show this guy everything why they're wrong, because people just aren't ready for that, especially if they're already resistant to those ideas. It's going to be really hard for you to change anybody's mind if you really come at it with, well, this is why you're wrong because X, Y, and Z, and I know better,
Right. I find that I come across people, and when I start to expose my belief or my understanding of this world and the world that we live in, is that I take their bubble, I break it a little bit, and the thing that puts them to sleep at night, the thing that they feel good about, that the world is going to be in one piece tomorrow, kind of gets a little bit sawed off at the edges a little bit. Because of what I'm espousing, and I find myself, when they retort with some of these, the usual Christian or even Muslim or whatever religion it is, I find myself getting angry because I think it's foolish. I think I myself in my youth spent enough time doing this, and coming around to the conclusion, after doing some real soul searching, after looking at it very finely and finally deciding that, no, that's not for me, or that's not true. I don't believe it. I don't.
When I was a child, I spoke as a child, right?
So you had you see a lot of, it seems like you see a lot of yourself in people you have those conversations with. And so some of that, this is almost like armchair therapist. So I don't want to come off that way, but would it be accurate to say that in seeing those aspects of yourself in them and seeing the stage of whatever journey that person's on in them, some of the frustrations you have with those people are frustrations with an older version of you?
Probably a younger version of me.
Well, yeah, a younger version of you. I don't know why I said older.
You're even more Christian in the future. That's how it happens.
To tell you the truth, I really can't get too much older.
So I think one of the things that helps me a little bit, and it might help you as well, and this is just a way that I approach a lot of conversations, not just the atheistic ones. And those who followed my channel I've been on this for 4 years. Oh God, what have I done with my life? Anyway,
cool shit. Suris.
Cool shit. One of the things that really changed the way that I approach a lot of conversations is I go into it with almost a goal-oriented mindset. So when somebody's having a conversation with you and the topic of their theism comes up, what is your goal? What are you attempting to accomplish in there? Because if the goal is to educate them, then they need to already be receptive to that education to begin with. Else that goal ends in failure. If your goal, let's say that they're a Christian who's saying that you're going to burn, in hell for whatever reason. I know my comment section's filled with quite a lot of that. Then the goal might be defense. And at that point, maybe a little bit of the arrogance is warranted, because this is a moment where somebody's basically encroached upon you and your well-being. But it's not always the case. So I guess the best advice that I would have is just go in with a clear goal into any of those conversations. If you don't have one when you start the conversation, then a lot of those frustrations can come up, because when you don't have a goal in mind in those conversations, sometimes you get this feeling, and maybe you'll empathize with this. You get that feeling of like, you just aren't getting it. Why aren't you understanding this thing I'm explaining to you? And a lot of that comes down to not necessarily approaching all conversations with the end goal of that conversation in mind. And I don't know if that's helpful for you, but I know that was helpful for me.
Well, I find myself most of the time just staying quiet. I don't want to get into it. Religion is not a topic, just like politics, that you don't really want to discuss over the dinner table. And most of the time I stay quiet unless I am really provoked. And then I find myself coming off and just, I retort. I say, I give them what I have, and I ask them for proof. I ask them for anything that's real, that we can look at, that's really something we can both understand. And that's when we have arguments.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to what is, I'll throw this in like almost a way to describe a game. Because this makes it like this divorces the entire conversation from religion, so that no matter what side of conversation somebody comes down to, it makes sense. So when it comes to evidence that someone will accept that something is X, let's say evidence that a video game is bad, we all have different criteria for what we accept makes a game good. For some people, a game can control horribly, but it has a great story. So they could be invested in like the worst programmed piece of spaghetti code of all time, but it's got a great story behind it, so it's good for them. And then there are other people that they really couldn't care for the story so long as it's coded well. And when they play it, the designers factored in that, okay, they're going to press buttons in a certain way and characters are going to move in a certain way, and it's going to feel good to play the game. Because there are people that accept these different forms of evidence, these different perspectives, sometimes it's hard, because you mentioned, like, can you bring something that we can both agree on? Not everybody's going to be able to do that. And I think you already know that from experience.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the same criterion for what makes good evidence. So again, I think it comes back to the goal thing. One way you can approach that is when somebody gives you evidence that feels, bad, and you feel yourself getting those frustrations, instead, kind of move the conversation to, is there some other scenario where you would accept this evidence as, logically consistent? If like with the last caller, I have a dream. That dream says that I was diagnosed with X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I share a consciousness with God. Is there any other circumstance in which we would accept a dream as evidence? Should we accept dreams as evidence in a court of law when we're dealing with, a case of homicide? Should we accept dreams as evidence? And you kind of get where I'm getting at. There are people who just haven't had that. There are people who haven't actually sat down and thought about the things that lead them to the beliefs that they do. They haven't thought about what criteria makes good evidence yet. And sometimes just saying, hey, have you thought about any other scenarios in which you would accept this as fair or true? And if it feels like they're pulling a reason out of their butt, if it feels like they're getting defensive, just go, hey, maybe we should move the conversation to something else. I just wanted to give you that food for thought, and then move on out of that. Because if you feel yourself getting frustrated and your goal is to educate someone, the more frustrated you are, the less effective you're going to be in accomplishing that goal.
Yeah. Yeah. It does make it worse. Like Go ahead.
You're right. When they start to pull out the Bible and they start pointing at verses, I kind of glaze over, and I'm really not too interested in this book. Whatever you've got an idea about it, but and you're right. It's many a times that I have done exactly that. I said, let's change the subject. Let's move on. We're done here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to be careful with this too. Like even on Twitter, sometimes if I'm not having a good day, I don't start a fight with somebody, but somebody might comment something stupid.
You woke up and chose violence.
Yeah, and then then you have to have a back and forth there, right? And it's just like, okay, no, and then I end up deleting a conversation or something because I know at the end of the day that conversation is probably not going to help people, right? My MO at the end of the day is, am I helping people? Am I even helping myself in these conversations? Am I going to learn something new from this? Am I even going to be open and receptive? Because otherwise, I'm not giving that person the same thing that I would want them to give me, right? Just like Suris was saying, there is a motivation involved. There's a goal involved that you really have to think about. It's difficult. It's hard. I think it's a skill that we all have to learn. Another thing I want to point out, though, is the systems of thinking that I value now were not things that I valued when I was younger. So there was a lot of emotional appeals and other kinds of rhetorical appeals that would have convinced me because I had different sense of values than I do now. Not everybody is going to value the arguments that I find to be convincing in the same way that I do. So you also have to work with your audience a little bit and realize I have to construct this in a way that's going to be palatable to them, or just realize that, hey, maybe there's other ways we can, really think about this topic altogether, or approaches to this topic, because, you talk to the average person on the street, they don't know what modus ponens means, or they're not going to care about what Socrates had to say. It's like, you got to meet people.
Post hoc ergo proctor hoc. They're going to be like, post lunch, what?
Yeah, exactly. And that's not, again, that's a result of my privilege for sure, to be able to have that kind of education. But also it's an internal thing. I can't give somebody the values. I wish I could make somebody value the same things I value. I guess I can always make arguments as to why they should value something, but that's always going to be dependent on a different value for sure. So it's kind of this never ending thing, but yeah, it's, you have to consider that too, when doing this.
Yeah. All right. I get you.
Yeah, for sure. I hope that was helpful, William. I think, as you alluded to, you're probably older than me and Suris, so you probably have some more life experience as far as conversations go. But I appreciate you asking us for some advice there. That's very kind of you.
I've been watching this on the tube for quite some time, so I decided that I need to bring out that question, at least for myself, or maybe your audience, to try to understand and try to have a little bit more maybe compassion for that other person.
Okay,
and that's what I look at,
I appreciate you calling in, William. This was a good conversation, and I'm glad that we talked about this, because this is definitely something that reaches close to my heart. At the end of the day, I'm doing this because I want to help people, whether that's a self-serving thing or not. I feel like this is an effective medium for me, and I hope people watching at home too, when you guys have conversations, you want to help people too, and also help yourself. Being open again to what other people have to say, in learning about what people think through that experience. So anyway, thanks again for calling in, William. Appreciate the call. It was really insightful. And I hope you have a great rest of your night. I always like it when we have super positive calls like that, Suris.
Happy calls are good. They're nice brain bleach.
Happy calls are good. They are really, really cool. I just want to give a quick plug as well before we get to this next call, to remind folks that if you like this show and you like other shows and you want to see others like them, you can do that on the AEN Podcast Network. There's a YouTube channel for that. You can go to tiny.cc/AEN podcasts to go check out some of the other shows like this one that are on the network. So pretty cool that we have that. And I want to take some more calls here. So let's talk to Chris, a different Chris from the UK, who's been waiting on the line for a while. I know so many Chris's. It's a Chrisception here. We're going to get Chris Redfield, all kinds of Chris's. Anyway, Chris, you're calling in. What's up?
Hey,
Chris.
Hi.
There he is. How's it going, Chris? Good. Thanks for calling us. How can we help you?
Hi. Greetings from the UK.
Neat. What's up?
Hi. So first of all, I was going to say I'm I'm originally from the States. Sorry for the delay in the call. I'm originally from the States, and I'm sorry for all that's going on in Texas. And I do fear it's probably going to spread across the country.
Yeah, I'm
so
sorry for it too.
I apologize for that in that regard.
Yeah.
It's
not great.
What I'm calling about is in regards to the state. Sorry, in terms of there's that
Keep going.
delay.
It's a bad delay this time. Usually it's not that long, but anyway, I'm gonna keep silent. I'm gonna let you talk. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. So I'm calling in regards to the Satanic Panic. So I'm a history teacher. I'm also a folklorist. So I'm looking at from that perspective. Are we in a continuation of the Satanic Panic, or are we going into a new Satanic Panic, i.e. QAnon and related situations, or am I over just thinking this?
Yes.
I think it's a little bit of both. So the Satanic Panic happened during a time where being an atheist, especially in the States, was a lot less normalized. Now, especially if you happen to be in a northern state, it's a little more lenient. It's not as bad as it used to be. It's still bad. Especially like I live in Georgia. If I say I'm an atheist out in public randomly out here, it's not the safest environment for me to do so. But it's better than it would have been, during the 80s, during the D&D is going to corrupt your kids era of that. But there's a difference in zeitgeist shift that has happened here in the States, at least. And that is that when it comes to those more extremist varieties of thought, like QAnon and stuff like that, there's a lot of media pushback. And during the Satanic Panic, we actually didn't see that as often. If you look at a lot of the older news segments, they were very willing to bring on people all the time and not necessarily challenge them on things like Pokemon was going to corrupt your kids, or video games are going to cause your kids to go to hell, like stuff like that. It was a lot more frequent, and there was less media pushback on the whole from multiple news organizations. Whereas these forms of thought, they are not quite fringe anymore. QAnon is a bit more than fringe now, unfortunately. But it's not quite as prevalent as a lot of the evangelical panicking about D&D and stuff that we used to see. So I think that yes, we are heading in a direction where there is a lot more of this than there was 10 years ago, but I don't think we're heading in a direction where there's as much of that particular religious brand of fervor as there was in the 80s. Now, whether this brand of fervor is more or less caustic, that I think that maybe this one's a little more terrible, because with the older Satanic Panic, there was a lot of this media is bad, so don't do it. The QAnon narrative is a little bit more insipid. So less people, but it's worse on its own.
Okay. So I didn't expect this, Suris, but I actually have a dissenting opinion from you.
Okay.
I think the Satanic Panic never really ended. In a sense, I think what we are experiencing right now is quite possibly worse in many ways than what we first saw in the 80s and 90s with the Satanic Panic. So, like, first, I think we have to figure out what was the Satanic Panic, and I think you're correct in pointing out that mass media scares is really what it boils down to. A lot of mass media scares about what's happening versus facts about the reality of a situation. So like one of the most expensive court cases in the history of the United States was during the Satanic Panic, which was at a lot of like allegations of satanic rituals and stuff. Investigations of that was a part of it. And the reason why that particular case was so expensive was because they had to interview like 50 different children. I think it was even more than that on this supposed abuse that was happening that wasn't happening. Lots of stuff like that. Other related stories, people locked up for crimes that didn't actually occur. I think that's the material effects of the Satanic Panic, of what you could point to as the most harmful portions. We're right in that mainstream media is pushing back on it more, but we have more media sources now than we did in the 80s and 90s. And we have more publications that are willing to put out this fake narratives about QAnon, fake stuff about ivermectin, fake stuff about COVID, all kinds of stuff that we just didn't have before, or the ones that we did have simply weren't as prevalent. And I would say that that is basically the new satanic panic. I mean, the attacks that happened earlier this year on January 6th at our Capitol is a result of QAnon. I fully believe that. And also is a result of this sort of new wave of misinformation that is happening through, select media sources. So I would say, yeah, we are experiencing a satanic panic. It's just come in a different form, and a much more sinister form as well.
I guess if I'm hearing that right, then if I'm looking at it from the perspective of what is accepted in as far as mainstream media is concerned, then my perspective is that it's not as bad. But if I have to factor in things like, several million sub YouTube channels that are able to spread all kinds of terrible propaganda, and there are people that believe it based on that, then yeah, I could understand that. There is certainly more access to misinformation.
Yeah. We didn't have an attack on the Capitol in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think of as, I think what we're seeing now is quite a bit different and affects quite a lot more people. And I also think that it's affecting casual conversations and casual opinions on stuff. I mean, look at the vaccine rates in this country. Why are we seeing it so low? It's because not people with suffering from particular kinds of mental illness, rather, right? Or people who have really fringe beliefs. It's mainstream now to have skepticism of vaccines. And that used to be more of a fringe thing. And I think that's because we're seeing a lot of this information coming from these, fake news sources. So yeah, like I think this is a new satanic panic, but it's almost like the new normal, I don't know. Chris from UK, what do you think?
Wow. I appreciate both your perspectives on it. I'm trying to thread the needle and see if there's somewhere in the middle. I guess I'm going slightly a little bit more with you, Dan, on this. Like I said, I'm coming at this from a humanist perspective. I'm an atheist, but I also come from a Jewish background. And I guess maybe I'm a little sensitive and sometimes, for better or worse terms, some things I hear. I've heard students and even some of the parents I deal with on a regular basis will bring up things like adrenochrome. I've had to recently do a discussion about anti-Semitic tropes in QAnon, and I've heard people bring up strange things with witchcraft, drinking baby blood, and I'm like, wait, are we back in this? It terrifies me, especially being an educator. And as you brought up about the whole case with, I believe it was either Canada or the U.S., where it took decades to finally free people who are innocent. I'm thinking as an educator, I'm like, oh, shoot, am I in the wrong career field at this point?
Well, and there's an aspect of this that gets, and I can understand with your background with a little bit more perspective, there's an aspect of this that gets really scary as well. And that's that not just with QAnon, but a lot of these used to be the Alex Jones-ish fringe conspiracies, but are accepted a lot more now. A lot of them kind of boil back to forms of anti-Semitism. When somebody's screaming about the globalist elites, if you press them hard enough on that, it ends up talking about Jewish people 9 times out of 10.
Oh yeah.
And it's really kind of scary that there's this almost euphemistic dog whistly language that people can fall back on to argue these things. But because of that, there are people that hear, like for instance, I've argued this on an earlier video, the difference between somebody on the left and then somebody who's a conspiracy theorist. If you tell them both, hey, there's a cabal of elites that are largely, controlling the world with the use of money, a leftist will go, well, yeah, look at what Jeff Bezos is doing. Look at lobbying. Look at the ways in which corporations are able to push our opinions and motives on things like climate change. And yeah, you'll get them to agree on that. But then if you talk to the conspiracy theorists, they'll agree with it too. But they just think that it's a bunch of, globalist elites. And again, that boils down to anti-Semitism half the time.
Right.
The difference is the difference in the two, and the fact that you can get so many parallels between the two. And one of them is what I would consider to be a sane position. The idea that, people are using money to influence politics. And then the insane position, there's a group of minorities that are trying to destroy the world via the Georgia Guidestones.
Right.
it's really scary how close you can get those two like very disparate beliefs.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Wait on that delay from Chris. There you go.
Maybe we live in interesting times.
Yes, we do live in interesting times.
In
It's scary
times, gentlemen.
Yeah, it even what scares me even more is a big difference even between now is, you know, it used to be we're not talking about zines, we're talking about structured corporations with buildings that are putting stuff out there, and not even on a private level but on a national level. There are even governments involved, foreign governments that are influencing discourse in this country as well too, that are also actively pushing this information. So like I think we are dealing with a misinformation scare of certainly my lifetime, if not of you know, even going past generations. I don't know. I don't know if I'd be able to answer how this compares to other periods of American history, even world history, but it's certainly very scary. And I scramble to look at documentation on what's the best way to convince people and change their minds and help people. And I think a lot of people are looking for those resources right now. A lot of people scrambling to figure out what's the best thing. And unfortunately, everything I've seen, there's no easy answers to. There's some techniques, there's some thought processes, there's some theories, but outside of what only some of us can do, for the vast majority of us, it does feel kind of hopeless. Even now, like talking on this platform, I know that I'm mostly going to be talking to people who already agree with me. That's just the reality of putting out a show like this. And I wish I could be doing more. You know, I really do. But anyway, I'm going to go on a tangent here. Chris, I hope we answered your questions sufficiently. I appreciate you calling in, and thanks for asking such a thought-provoking question.
A question that managed to actually divide me and Dan on something too.
Yeah, which is interesting. But you know, we're scholars, Suris. You know, this is discourse, my friend.
I'm always okay with having dissenting opinions on opposite sides, even if they don't come to a resolution at the end, because that's the nature of being a human being who likes learning shit.
Yes, I agree with that sentiment totally. I want to get to Mark. Let's talk to Mark, who's calling in from North Carolina. Mark, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, what's going on, man? How you guys doing?
Doing good, man.
Good, actually.
Cool. What's up?
Right on. Well, you know, just a little insight on who you're speaking to. My wife was listening to you, and she is more atheist than me.
Okay.
Per se. And so my point is, I've come from a very strong Christian background.
Okay.
Right?
Understandable.
And
so did we.
I've come to
we did too.
Yeah. Nice. I appreciate that, for real. Right? I've come to a point in my life where I believe that more so everything is pretty much about control, group thought, and everything else. Right? You can get that relation, correct?
To a degree.
In the group thought.
To a degree, I can understand that.
Category, right?
I think that's been true for like a lot of human existence. I just think people are better at it now. In a lot of ways,
it's now that we have access to things like search algorithms and stuff like that, it is much easier to categorize people into boxes of like, you believe X, Y, and Z, so you might buy product Y, Z, and X.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Very good. So yes, we're on the same page there. So I guess what I'm trying to determine, right, is I see Christianity. I see, forget Christianity. Let's just say religion, right? Religion, broader scale, and then atheism. I understand what atheists believe to some extent, right? But the fact that
what
you
is
guys
it?
Put yourself
Sorry,
in a category.
But what do you think we believe?
Well, I know what you don't believe, which is why
Yes.
I'm calling. I want to know what you do believe.
Okay.
Understandable.
Right? I know you don't believe in Christianity and the it from what I've listened to, the majority, the basis of your argument, so to speak, right, is ultimately can be put towards religion or anti-religion. So I'd really like to know what an atheist does believe.
Okay.
It depends.
You go first. Yeah, you go first on this.
So it depends individual to individual. If you've got a very colloquial atheist, their version of atheist is going to be, well, I just simply don't believe in any gods. That's what atheism is colloquially. If we were to delve into the more philosophical positions, there's what's called a local atheist. There's a grouping of religious beliefs or gods that they actively reject, as opposed to just not believing in them. Or you can go a step further. There's a global atheist, where any positions where a god is concerned, including ones they have not yet encountered, are automatically rejected. Not merely not believed, but rejected. There are variants on this.
So you're anti-God. So you're anti-God on all the levels you just explained.
Oh, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so if you merely lack a belief in a deity, you're not anti that deity, because there's not a point in time where you've come to the conclusion that, okay, you hate this thing or you're actively against it. If somebody has I'll give an example. If somebody's a local atheist and their local atheism against, say, the Christian God is based on the moral argument against God or the problem of evil, then that person could accurately be described as anti-God, at the very least in the demonstration of that argument. But it doesn't necessarily mean the person is anti-God, because there could always be, just as a hypothetical, there could always be that world where there's a misunderstanding between them and, should that deity exist, and then that person's not anti-God, they're anti-a-straw man.
Could I sum it up and say you're anti-control?
I can be okay with that one.
Yeah,
in
so
many
Mark,
cases.
I think an important thing that Suris is pointing out is people who use the term atheist or non-theist, I mean, we even have different languages to talk about similar concepts because we want to be as precise as we can with our language. The point is, when you talk to somebody who's an atheist, they may be an atheist for different reasons than another person might be an atheist. And how they use the word atheist might be different in how another person uses the word atheist. So there's a little bit of gray area in these words too. And it's important to make sure you understand which definition you're working with, because Mark, listen, to just say that, oh, you're an atheist, so you're anti-God, that's too prescriptive. You can't do that. You can't do that with atheists, because there's a lot of people who have different feelings on them.
What you said was there's a lot of gray.
Gray in how people define it. Yeah, because people define it differently. Sure.
Yeah, sure. Because it's not just black and white. It's individual.
Yeah,
sure. Just like being a Christian, that can mean a million different things, because there's so many. There's probably more definitions of Christianity than atheism, I would argue, but that's a whole other thing.
Academically, at least, that's true.
Yeah,
sure.
So sure, absolutely. But at the end of the day, there's the gray area, the unknown, the gray area that's left to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yes, to decide for themselves on how they want to use the words to describe their lack of belief. Sure.
Correct. Which gets to my question is, or back to one of the things I said is about group thought.
Okay.
Right?
What
And
is your question?
classifying yourself as either religious or atheist or this or that. How about not just be any of that and just be a free man?
So the issue with that, and it doesn't come down to control with that particular thing. The thing is, with we as human beings, we crave shorthands. There are shorthand descriptors of ourselves that we grasp to. It's part of standard human communication. So, for instance, there are several identities that I might use to identify myself.
Like an anime cat girl.
I mean, I use a VTuber model, so yes. As far as like when I'm streaming, that is one.
humans need to identify with something.
Well, then not necessarily. Some people prefer not to be categorized in any way, shape, or form, but just as a group, just like how there can be individual antisocial humans, but as a group, we are a social species. As a group, we are uniquely lazy in our methods of categorization. We look for shorthand, what they're called in psychology, they're called schemas, groupings of attributes that we can put under labels. So if I say I'm a gamer, there's a grouping of attributes you have under that label that may not be accurate. When you think gamer, you might think somebody who enjoys Call of Duty, and I personally don't, but it gives you a shorthand to communicate roughly what I'm trying to communicate. So when I say atheist, you've got a schema of roughly what I might be. And when we sit down and have a conversation, then we can get down to specifics. Yeah, it just becomes an identifier.
There it is. Okay. So it's just another way of, I guess, calling on a certain group of people that may or may not consider themselves this group or that group, but it's like, hey, man, here we are free. Let's live in the gray.
Yeah, it's just and it just gets useful as a shorthand, because if I were to say my grandpa is a Vietnam, well, he's not a Vietnam veteran, but if I were to say my grandpa's a Vietnam veteran, you have an idea in your head of what that is. And that's faster as a form of communication than me saying my grandpa was a soldier conscripted in this year. He left in this year. He spent this much time in Vietnam doing this particular task at this particular time. And if I were to go through all those details, much like if I were to communicate, I am a gamer in that I enjoy playing League of Legends and I play Magic the Gathering, and I go through the whole ordeal.
Humans so humanity by default needs to identify with each other by
certainly wants to
common interest or common thought.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So that's atheism then.
Well, I mean, when you say that's atheism, I mean that's all categories. that's how people categorize themselves. Is they have general things that they share.
Exactly. So
yeah.
The question is, do you think that we get to a point where people don't have to categorize themselves and just live?
I think the only way we get to that point is if we stop having society. By having a group of people, we are naturally inclined to grasp for those shorthands, because before we had mass advertising campaigns, we had ideas behind these shorthands. For us to have this idea that everybody is a perfect individual, which we know to be true, nobody is identical to another person. This is something that we already get. But for us to communicate without having any of these shorthands, we have to remove all forms of prejudice, which is not something we can really do. We can work on it individually with ourselves, but as a society, not really.
Yeah.
We're programmed otherwise.
Sure. I mean, Mark, the ironic thing is there is a word for the thing that you're describing, which is an atheist, which is someone who more or less doesn't care to answer the question of God's existence and other kinds of questions. So ironically in that, of course, you're using an identifier, but like, that's just language, man. It's hard to escape that, you know?
Yeah, I get it, man. I'm just living a life of being free and trying to understand everything around me.
I hear you.
Understandable. Nothing wrong with that.
No, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I appreciate you guys taking my call.
Oh, no problem, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. Yeah, that was, I guess we answered that. Yeah, it's, I don't know about you, Suris. I get tired of the conversation of what is an atheist and what isn't. I get that it's important. It's important. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but that doesn't mean I can't be tired of it.
When it comes with any number of identities, there's two things that matter to me more than anything else. Thing one, does it roughly, it doesn't have to clearly, but does it roughly communicate to other people what the word means? So if I say I'm an atheist, you kind of understand what I mean. That's all that's really needed as far as shorthand conversation's concerned. The other thing is, when it comes to an identifier, did I choose that identifier myself? For instance, I am an atheist, but philosophically, if I were to go down that tree, I land more in the camp of agnosticism, but colloquially, 110%, it is atheism. What we understand, like lack of belief atheism to be, that is where I am. And when I say atheist, that's fairly clearly communicated. And I'm perfectly fine accepting that label.
See, and I don't want to spend too much more time with this topic, but like I am actually more so I realized when I was a Christian, I had a totally different idea of what atheist meant. I believe the definition I used was like someone that like only believes in science or something, right? And I realized that was because of my Christian upbringing, right? Because I had pastors telling me the definition of atheist and not
they
atheist.
Believe science is their god. That
exactly.
Whole thing.
And I wonder, Suris, I wonder if that's a hindrance for us as a movement, because we've been having people define us for so long. And I say us in the collective sense, right? Like us as in people who use that label for themselves in some way or another, that it almost is a hindrance for us to make progress to people, because people already have preconceived ideas of what that is. I had to deconstruct the definition of atheism for myself, for sure.
So I think that it's actually a little... I think the more destructive issue is not that other people have defined it in such various ways, because that's just demonization of groups. That's just a thing that happens with all groupings, no matter what. There are people who grow up in other religious societies who have demonization. Where Christians are concerned, Christians have demonization. Where Muslims are concerned, I think that the larger issue is people not understanding that atheism does not necessarily denote any particular beliefs when it comes to humanitarianism, when it comes to things like that. I think if people understand that, and if we can communicate that atheists are as unique as the individual personalities who hold the position, I think that's probably more important than whichever dumb ways a bunch of evangelical pastors have tried to define atheism for their particular flock.
Good insight there. Yeah, I think I agree with you. We've had so many great calls tonight. I really want to take just this last one that's been waiting for a bit real quick, and then this will be the last call we take for tonight. I want to talk to Harley calling in from Idaho. Harley, we're going to make a real quick call here. What's up?
Thank you so much for taking my call. I know you guys don't have a lot of time left. So I wanted to talk about what you guys were talking about at the very beginning of the show, which was abortion. I live in Idaho, which is pretty similar, I think, to the South, kind of. We're like the South of the West, in my opinion. But I was put in a Catholic school when I was 14 years old because I was getting in trouble as a kid, and that was my mom's reaction to that. I got put in Catholic school. So long story short, there was a lot of indoctrination that happened. And before that, I would have probably, before I went to Catholic school, I probably would have said I was pro-choice, all of that stuff. And after that, all of that indoctrination in the Catholic school, it took probably about 2 or 3 years before I got out of that and ended up going back to being pro-choice instead of pro-life. And
interesting.
You had a whole rubber banding moment with that.
You did horseshoe theory. You were horseshoe theory in action. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
But
Okay.
Suris had said something earlier that I wanted to address, and actually is the main reason why I called. And he had said that if he had talked to a Christian, a good argument would be that all fetuses would go to heaven, and that is not actually what they teach in Catholic school. At least that's not what I was taught.
In Catholic school, I believe that it's with fetuses. They go to a form of purgatory, correct?
Correct. Yes, that is correct. So usually the argument was, well, you don't want all the fetuses in purgatory because if their mother's in heaven and the baby's in purgatory, or the fetus is in purgatory, then they're going to be forever separated. So
see, when
it's just
that brings up a question: in the version of purgatory that you were taught, was it forever? Because the version that's been communicated to me is that purgatory is almost kind of a cleansing zone where
Right.
there's a set amount of time that's spent there, and then you then get entry into heaven, or at least eligibility. This was the whole reason that for a while the Catholic Church was selling, I think it was called condolences, where like you would buy 30 or 40 years from the bishop out of purgatory for your family, and that was a way that the church generated money. So if I don't know, what was the narrative
Yeah.
of purgatory that you were taught?
It was definitely taught to me that it was forever, that it was something that you couldn't get out of. If you were in purgatory, you're in purgatory. But just like Catholics often disagree. There's
So, like,
different
in
arguments
purgatory
I've heard
then,
from both sides.
did they stay fetuses forever? Did they not grow up? How does that work?
Yeah, no, this is that. I have no idea how that works. I definitely don't believe that now.
Yeah.
But that's just like, but the way that they would indoctrinate us is we would have literal assemblies, like pro-life assemblies. This wasn't something that was just like taught in class. They would take the entire school and put us in the auditorium, and we would have like chants and songs, and they would bring different guests to talk, and we would be shown slideshows of like really graphic things and stuff like that. So it was really intense.
So that's kind of weird, because like in 2007, the Pope in Vatican City basically buried the concept of limbo and said that purgatory wasn't a thing. It wasn't going to be considered part of Catholic doctrine anymore from that point, if memory serves. And then this
definitely would have been. Let's see.
But you got to remember, Suris, there's also people that say the Pope isn't actually Catholic, so anything goes.
That's called sedevacantism.
Right.
The idea that there was like a true Pope and we've lost the way.
Yeah. We've lost track of the
It
canon.
was definitely like over 10 years ago. So I don't know if it was before 2007 that this would have happened. Probably.
That brings up another question. So the way that purgatory was taught to you, there's two ways purgatory is thought. There's purgatory as a place and purgatory as a process. It sounds like you were taught purgatory as a place, like this is a place where the fetuses would reside in limbo for X amount of time. Whereas from my understanding, the majority of orthodoxal thought on Catholicism is that purgatory is a process. Like I said, the way that I've always had to communicate to me is purgatory is a cleansing process.
Yeah, I definitely heard that before, but when I was in school, that's definitely not really what I was taught. Now, granted, I only went to Catholic school for 2 years, and my situation changed a lot as a kid. But my family was still we weren't religious beforehand, but then when all that happened, we started going to church, all of that stuff. And yeah, that was pretty much what most people, at least in my small circle, believed, was that purgatory was a place, but it wasn't a place that you could get out of. It was just a place where they would send fetuses and other random people. But I definitely am atheist now. It's been probably maybe 12 or 13 years since then. So,
well,
yeah, I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to let Suris know, because that was the first thought that popped into my head.
Yeah, I know that there's there's also evangelicals who have who don't believe in the idea of the age of accountability, and so the argument doesn't work where that's concerned either. The you must feticide argument is basically, if you believe in the age of accountability, which I find to be an answer to the moral monster argument, that's where that argument is useful. But if you're dealing with like the experience that you had, it largely won't work in that particular conversation, especially since in there's the entire idea that if somebody dies repentant or with inability to repent, and the family repents in prayer and pious charity, then they will be cleansed. That's at least the stuff that the sources that I'm looking at right now. That's effectively what they say there. So I guess it really depends on which particular ideological doctrine is being fed to you that day.
Yep, it's true. And this
Yeah.
is personally,
Yeah, it's really true.
you know, I was just gonna say this is personally why I try to avoid doing the theological discussions with Christians like as little as possible, at least like theological implications, because like there's always going to be somebody that says something else about a topic at the end of the day. I try to like mitigate that as much as I can, because like, you know, you can do the whole, oh, the Bible says this and this is bad kind of thing, like and of course you should be doing that within certain contexts. Like if somebody's defending slavery, yeah, you should probably talk about how that wasn't a great thing. But with like really abstract stuff like this, like Purgatory, like, well, it's not like you can ask the front administrator at Purgatory, you know, what the process there is like.
Hello,
you know,
Hello, Saint John. This is Among Us imposter.
Excuse me. I am writing this email. I'd like to know more about how you guys work. But
can anyway, I speak to the manager of Purgatory?
Can I speak to the manager of Purgatory? Yeah, exactly, something like that. But Harley, I'm glad that I'm glad that you got out of that and you've learned from your experiences and that you're here today to talk to us about that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Well,
thank you so much for taking my call. I've been watching you for like the past few months now, and I've learned a lot from your show. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Harley. That means a lot. I'm so glad that you're getting something out of the show, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. That was nice. That makes me feel good. But we are going over time here, so we need to wrap it up because we're going to go to the Discord right after this. There is a fan Discord server that we like to do a little Q&A afterwards. That's at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. So check that out if you're watching live, and we will go there in a sec. But Suris, thanks so much for being on the show tonight, bud. Appreciate it.
No problem.
So if people want to check you out, where can people find you at?
So if you want to hear more conversations of the variety that are had on this type of show, then if you just type in Suris into your search bar on YouTube, you'll find my channel that way. If you want to hear me talk about video games and card games and more lighthearted topics, you can actually go to Necosuris, and that is a different YouTube channel where I curate content where I'm talking about that, because I know that people who care about philosophy and people who care about video games don't always intersect. But if you want to see where all of that happens, all of my shows are done live and then put up on the channel afterwards, a lot like how this show is curated. So if that is a thing that you care about, if you want to watch them live, then head over to twitch.tv/Necosuris, and then you will see everything happening live over there. And sometimes I even have guests on my show too.
Cool. And as always, folks, I want to thank everybody that donates on patreon.com/truthwanted. You guys rock. That's a great way to support this show. Again, I'm a volunteer here, and a lot of the people that help make this show are volunteers as well. So all of that money goes towards getting equipment and just doing cool stuff with this show. So thank you to everybody that donates on Patreon. You can also support the show by becoming a member, by donating on there. Again, as low as 99 cents a month for that. For cool stuff. And we have a merch store. Go check out our merch. We got the Truth Wanted hoodies, the t-shirts, all the swag that you need. So look for it all on there. Again, this show is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin and the AEN Podcast Network. So check out the AEN Podcast Network for other shows for that. Links for that is in the description. If you want to talk to me, you can follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, or you can subscribe on YouTube to Truth Wanted, or on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. And another way to contact the show is through our email. It's truth@atheist-community.org for that. Last but never, ever, 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 Suris, not least, is the wonderful, fantastic crew who we must thank for making this show happen. Look at that crew. And cats. Cruising cats. Absolutely. A lot of cats on tonight, apparently. Oh my God. Was that you? Suris, was that you? Okay. All right. Because I know you have cats, and I wasn't sure, but you do have cats separate from yourself. But all right. So that's on record now. Suris, thanks again for being on the show. Any words of wisdom before we wrap up tonight's episode of Truth Wanted?
I guess the best advice I can give is do not judge a book by its cover. If you find somebody who looks a particular way or acts a particular way at first, maybe sit down and get to know them. That theist who you really don't like might actually be one of the best humanists you ever meet. That atheist that you really respect might end up being one of the least likable people that you know. Sit down with people, have conversations with them, get to know them, and come to your own decisions on people as individuals.
How very fitting for the theme for tonight, especially given your chosen appearance. Thank you again, Suris, for being on the show. And thanks to everybody who is watching. Remember to always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.
Watch the nonprofits and join the hosts in the live chat. Sundays at 3 p.m. Central between the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.